Welcome to our webinar on creating strategic partnerships with federal labs and research universities. This is brought to you by the UAS Cluster Initiative of Oklahoma and Kansas. This is a program through the Small Business Administration in Washington, D.C. We're part of the Regional Innovation Cluster Program. We're one of 7 clusters around the country. Each is focused on a different industry sector and also has a geographic footprint. So we are focused on unmanned aerial systems in Oklahoma and Kansas. So this webinar series is one of the programs that we offer. We have a number of other programs and encourage you to go to our website and take a look at what we have taking place throughout the year. So for today, we have 3 amazing speakers who are with us today to talk through this topic. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about each of our panelists, and then they're going to tell you a little bit about what they do and some details about their day-to-day and how it relates to technology transfer. So our first speaker that I'm going to introduce is Derek Parks. He's with the Technology Transfer Program. He's the Technology Transfer Program Manager at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, so NOAA. Derek is located in Silver Springs, Maryland. In this role, he oversees NOAA's intellectual property and collaborative research and development portfolio for the full NOAA enterprise, which is made up of over 35 labs and programs. Derek's a 25-year veteran of the U.S. Department of Commerce. That's very, congratulate you on that. And he's got experience in technology transfer, international trade, communications, website development, and project management. In addition to receiving his bachelor's degree from the University of Colorado in Boulder, Derek also studied political science in Rome, Italy at Rome University. Do you speak Italian, Derek?
Certo che parlo italiano, come no.
Great. And then after moving to Washington, D.C. in 1991, you began working with Commerce, assisting U.S. business to export their products and services. And you also received a bronze medal for managing the content for several government websites, the export.gov and buyuas.gov, which is a lot of information, so that's no small feat. The next person that I'm going to introduce is Daniel Will. He's the Executive Director of Cowboy Technologies, and that was an organization that began in 2011 as a for-profit LLC owned by OSU Research Foundation. And it's to serve as a catalyst for commercializing Oklahoma State University technology through successful startup companies. They provide a full range of commercialization services for technologies originating within OSU. And Daniel, I'll give you a chance to tell us more about what those services are, because there's many services that you offer. And previous to joining Cowboy Technologies, Daniel was a product line manager at Legion Technologies. Did I get that right?
Agilent.
Agilent, thank you.
Agilent.
There we go. A Fortune 500 life science and electronic diagnostic technology company. You received your degree at Kansas State University and your MBA of University of Colorado, and they let you into the state of Oklahoma.
Still.
They still let you in. And then our final guest speaker today is Russell Hopper. He's a licensing associate and technology development center at Oklahoma State University, so he works closely with Daniel. Russ has over 25 years experience in technology commercialization and startups, and 5 years at Michigan State University launching agricultural and industrial biotechnology startups. And you went on to spend 6 years working in the semiconductor industry, and you also worked for Los Alamos National Lab in licensing and as an entrepreneur in residence. So you've got the perspective of both a lab and a university and an entrepreneur. You've been at OSU for over 3 years as a senior licensing associate, working with engineering, agriculture, and material science innovations. And you're also a mentor and a coach for the NSF I-Corps program, and are on the Technology Business Development Program Committee. And you've advised dozens of entrepreneurs in starting, funding, and running their enterprises. So between the 3 of our speakers today, I want to welcome you, but we have a wealth of knowledge and expertise. So now I'm going to go to each of you and let you tell us a little bit more about yourself. So I'm going to go in reverse. So Russ, we'll start with you if you want to tell us a little bit more and things that I might have left out.
not much more about me. You got it all. I started here at Oklahoma State. I got my degrees here, so it's kind of like coming home. Primarily, our office is involved in identifying technologies that may have commercial potential, and then also protecting those technologies through patents, and then marketing those technologies and through commercialization through licensing. That's kind of us in a nutshell. It's a much sort of broader application and thing to do, but all of our commercialization occurs through licensing. Sometimes it goes through a startup, sometimes it goes to a going concern. Our mission, obviously, to foster the creation and innovation of innovative technologies and to manage those technologies for the benefit of the university and the public. We're a land-grant university, which means that we have 3 missions folded together: education, research, and outreach. Our job is mostly on the outreach side. We try to take the results of the research and commercialize it for economic benefit for the state and the university. So we interface with faculty in the commercial sector, work with patent counsel, evaluate markets. We actually have, we work closely with mostly the business school to identify students who are getting MBAs who also have technical backgrounds, and they come in as paid interns to do a lot of the work for us for market evaluation, technology evaluation, et cetera. So that helps us. I've dabbled in a lot of different technologies, but I can't be a subject matter expert in everything. It's nice to have a mechanical engineer or a chemical engineer on staff to help us do stuff. We then look for licensees. There's a marketing component, negotiate terms of licenses, which is a legal component, and then we also help the faculty and graduate students and postdocs start companies. We also manage our OSU App Center, so that gives us access to a lot of cool stuff too. So at Oklahoma State University, we have a pretty good technology development ecosystem. The engineering college manages a group called the New Product Development Center, and so they can do design and prototype development. My group, Technology Development Center, which is primarily involved in licensing and patenting. We've got a research park, which includes an incubator and an accelerator. We work very closely with our School of Entrepreneurship on the NSF I-Corps site program, which trains inventors to be more business-like and also identify where the markets are. And then, of course, Cowboy Technologies, which is my colleague Daniel. They are responsible for both starting or assisting with startups and getting funding, and they also do sponsored research.
Well, thank you. So I'm going to ask Daniel to talk a little bit about himself and kind of tell us how Cowboy Technologies supports OSU and what Russ does and vice versa.
So yeah, we're very much an extension of the Technology Development Center in Russ's office. We are working with them and those researchers that come into the office with their invention disclosure, continually working with them to identify those technologies that have some really good commercial perspective and work with them along with the TDC on putting together business models, go-to-market strategies for those prospective technologies. Look for those kind of entrepreneurial characteristics of the people that might be involved, helping recruit outside parties to collaborate with those inventors to create a team that could actually be a viable startup, spin-out company operationally to then license that technology from OSU and turn it into a commercially viable opportunity. So we provide ongoing business advisory services for those companies. We provide not only sponsor research in the technologies before they're ready to spin out of the university, but also seed investment in those spin out startup opportunities, licensing the OSU technology. We sit on the board of those companies that we take an equity position with our seed investment and continue to nurture them through those startup pains to hopefully get them to a successful commercial business model that we had originally set out for them. We also help them attract and raise new investment from other funding sources, angels and venture capital. We also assist in procuring additional non-dilutive funding through State of Oklahoma resources, OCAST, and also SBR, STTR awards. and also work with them trying to find some of the right type of fit business amenities and scalable office space or lab space that are needed to operationalize those startup companies here in Stillwater or the region.
Wonderful. What don't you do, Daniel? All right. Well, so Derek, now you're coming from a different perspective. You're coming from the federal lab system, and tell us a little bit about yourself and how technology transfer works in your world.
Okay. And actually, if I had known Russ's full background, I would have just stayed home today. He's got the whole thing covered, so forget about it. But so, yeah, well, thank you for having me. And I work in the Technology Partnerships office here at NOAA, and it's a very small office for NOAA, but it's a function that's fairly typical around the government and is comparable to what's at the university level in their technology transfer offices. So we do many of the same functions. Technology evaluation coming out of our labs, patenting if appropriate, anything that's related towards the commercialization of those particular technologies. And that's really the goal, is to make sure that we're giving the best bang for the buck for the taxpayer. They've invested in all of this early stage research, and depending on the agency, that might be what the case is, or in our case, it's applied research that meets the NOAA mission. So everything that we do research-wise is dedicated towards meeting that mission. But there's this secondary objective of actually getting some of that technology out into the commercial sphere, boosting the economy, helping small businesses. So that's really the goal. In addition to doing that through the patent licensing, traditional patent licensing format, we give a lot of it away, frankly, so that's one thing that's a little bit different. A lot of our software and other components, technologies are released through publications or through websites or other means that we can enable through our office to actually get those out to companies. But we also do quite a bit through cooperative research and development agreements, and that's something that I'm really focused quite a bit on. The one thing that we don't focus on as much as the universities is some of the startup companies and things like that. We've actually had a startup company out of NOAA, but basically that was the result of us just releasing a technology back to the inventor. The inventor retired and started his own company. So it's really neat, but it's just not something that we focus on in the federal sphere as much as you're going to get in the university side. So it's kind of a big tour of the technology transfer side. The other component of our office is the Small Business Innovation Research Program, which was mentioned earlier on, and that's another great way to become involved with NOAA and other federal agencies in terms of getting funding for research that you may want to do that's related to the NOAA mission or to other missions for that matter.
So before we jump into the questions and some of the information that we have today, just to kind of set the stage, and want to just ask you each for a couple sentences on, if you were going to describe technology transfer to someone, what would you tell them? And I know this is a topic that, they have full day trainings about, you can talk about it for hours. So if you just kind of your elevator pitch of what would you tell somebody when they ask you, what's technology transfer? What would you say? So Daniel, I'll start with you because you work with you probably get this question a lot.
For me, given that we are focused on those commercially viable technologies being invented at OSU, being spun out of startup companies, it really means putting together and finding the right team of folks. And a lot of times that does mean finding outside business experienced folks doing tech commercialization to come in advisory roles or mentor roles initially when we're still kind of hashing through the proof of concept through some prototype levels. While the technology is still at the university, and then pairing that with, and they may be the same people after mentoring, that ends up being kind of a plug-in key component contributor to the startup company. And so it's kind of creating that ecosystem of entrepreneurial minded folks with good scientific acumen to create a team of folks that can turn a commercially viable technology into an actual product line that makes money.
Russ, what would be your pitch?
Well, we don't get quite into it as deeply as Daniel does. We have to work very closely with the inventors so that we can understand the technology and make sure that we have a suitable write-up that we can hand off to the patent attorneys And my job then primarily is the liaison between the patent attorney and the researcher to make sure that what the researcher did is translated into patentees. And then, of course, the rest of my day is spent perusing the potential licensees through markets and an industry. And so we travel around, go to trade shows and conferences and whatnot, trying to identify places that commerce might be to license our technology. And of course, then the last thing is once we get some protection and identify a partner, then we work on the license. And we work very closely with Daniel. If the licensee turns out to be an OSU researcher in a startup, or even if it's the researcher winds up staying in the university, but we still have a startup, then we work closely to identify the best terms that we can provide to a startup company. They have way different needs as far as upfront and milestones and things like that that a going concern wouldn't have and we wouldn't have to worry about. So we're very cognizant of the needs and requirements of startup.
Right. And Derek, from the lab side, the federal lab side, because your mission and directives are a bit different than perhaps a university, how would you describe technology transfer?
So at the very basic level, it's lab to market, and that's something that we talk about all the time, is getting the technologies out of the lab and actually out into the marketplace. But that's really kind of just scratching the surface. What I would like to see is a broader ecosystem that we can create around each of our labs that involves the local universities, it involves the applicable industry sectors, and all of these groups working with each other and talking to each other and having a development life cycle that spawns off new technologies and improves the technologies that are coming back in to meet the mission as well. So that's something that we're trying to work on here at NOAA as much as possible, but I think that's broadly what a lot of labs are looking at as well.
That's a good point. I mean, we really always focus on universities and labs trying to partner with industry, as you said, to get these technologies out into commercial markets, but there's also a lot of partnerships that take place between the labs and universities. That's probably a big component of it.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Kind of gets us set up for some of the questions as we dig into the nuts and bolts of, how these things work and how technology transfer really takes place the day-to-day, and getting into the weeds a little bit. So we're focused on unmanned aerial systems. I know in our work we're coming across technologies all the time, but what kinds of technologies are you seeing being developed with applications in UAS? And so one of the things that we're always trying to educate people on is that when you talk about related technologies to unmanned aerial systems, it could be battery technologies, advanced materials, big data, sensors. I mean, there's so many things that you wouldn't even think of as UAS right away. So, what are you seeing? And Derek, I'll start with you. I'll pick on you first. In the labs, which there's, I think, still over 600 labs across the country as part of the lab consortium, if you will. What are you seeing being developed around UAS?
Great, you just dropped 600 labs in my lab. I appreciate that. I'll start with the first one.
Yeah.
It's funny because it's almost easier to ask what applications are not being considered for unmanned vehicles or remotely operated vehicles is probably the better word for it. But speaking from the NOAA side specifically, a lot of our survey activities, whether they be coastal survey, whether it be ocean color and variety of things like that, basically validating what is coming off of the satellites. We're using unmanned systems for a lot of those type of functionalities, just because they're cheaper to implement. They can do jobs that are generally boring and dangerous in a lot of cases, so that's another good reason to substitute them. But we're also finding cases where they're much less invasive in the environment, which is a big thing for us. So Arctic exploration, looking at marine mammals, these are all things that we've been doing with aerial systems that we weren't doing before, and they're in many cases off-the-shelf handheld systems, all the way up to when you're looking at hurricanes and not so much tornadoes because they're a little bit too difficult to get a system quickly implemented in there. But we are actually looking at that as well. I shouldn't even say that. But hurricanes in particular, you look at very large systems that we've acquired from the military, their old systems, and they're flying those into hurricanes in areas that are just too dangerous or too difficult to fly humans into with aircraft. So tons and tons of applications. And from NOAA's perspective in particular, we're using a lot of previously acquired hardware. So we're not actually developing the systems ourselves. We do need the systems. What we're doing is we're developing sensors to go on these different platforms and different size platforms. So that's really the interface, and where we're providing that collaborative capability is we have a bunch of mission requirements, and we can develop the sensors to put on there and help to open up that whole area of business for a UAS manufacturer. So.
Okay, great. So Russ and Daniel, I mean, OSU has been part of UAS development and technology development from the very beginning. You've been one of the early adopters and leaders in the university space and with a lot of these technologies. So, you know, I'll just ask the both of you, what are you seeing being developed both within OSU, but just among your peers and throughout the country and in other universities that you've maybe come across?
Well, most of the research here is both platform and target application. So OSU, we are in Oklahoma, so we have a pretty large component of research going on here, both in agricultural and in oil and gas exploration. So we have programs that are sensors for, say, for oil and gas exploration or pipelines and stuff, where we would be looking at sensors that can monitor methane, that sort of thing, as well as on the agricultural side, we have a number of technologies that were developed primarily for enhancing the ability to determine whether you need to apply more or less, say, fertilizer to a field. So we developed a technology called Green Seeker that was originally applied to you know, agricultural machines that would go out into a field, and now we've adapted that into the UAS. It's pretty university-wide. We've got the guys working on the drones, and we've got guys within the UAS center working on sensors and autopilot type inventions, and then they work with the applications folks, whether they're in ag or elsewhere in engineering, to come up with new ways to deploy the sensors that they have now. And then, of course, Derek mentioned some safety issues, and so we've got a fire safety program here, and one of Daniel's first projects was a drone that could be flown inside a building that would be in lieu of a firefighter going in, so you could see where the hot spots were, et cetera, and it would be able to fly and not hang up on things that you would find in a building. So the types of technologies that we are working on and see here related to UAS span the gamut from not just propulsion, but also sensing and autopilot. You think anything, Daniel?
No. I'd say it really is the gamut. It's propulsion. It's a lot of the kind of fixed wing platform kind of technologies. There's that kind of unique rotary UAV that can fly in around objects without causing damage to the structure or itself when you're in tight quarters for situational awareness or visibility into uncertain situations. But it's also a lot of the sensor integration, you know, being application-specific sensor integration. We have pretty cool core technology that allows for really complex sensor integration on any platform, whether it's fixed wing or rotary, to do mission-centric types of analysis on the fly, you know, communication to a base station, but to really, kind of, bring some autonomy to the actual UAV versus it being completely manually driven. And so there's a kind of wide gamut, I would say, from platform to sensor integration and kind of autonomous type flight control.
So, I mean, for a lot of people, the question I get all the time is, they learn about all these technologies that are available in labs and in universities, but they don't even know where to begin. So if you could talk a little bit about how someone would gain access to the technologies that you're talking about that are available for commercialization, and then kind of the follow-up, is once they do figure that out, they always want a person. That seems to be the biggest thing is, they want an actual human being, a name that they can call up. And when I say a person, it could even be the title of the person that they should be looking for to contact. So, I'll start with you, Derek. How would somebody be able to gain access to these technologies that you were talking about that are available for commercialization?
So, a couple of different ways. Since I'm here representing all 600 federal labs, I'm going to say the Federal Laboratory Consortium, federallabs.org, is a good place to start. There's something, FLC is their acronym, and they have something called FLC Business. And somebody could go in, and it's designed to be a clearinghouse for all available federal technologies. As with any clearinghouse, it's only as good as the information that gets put in there, and on occasion only as good as the IT support that you get. But with that in mind, at least it's one place to start, rather than having to go to 50 different federal websites trying to figure out where a technology is. So that's a good place. Obviously, your targeted Google searches will get you a little ways as well, but essentially each federal agency that does research and development is going to have a technology transfer office. So in terms of your searching, that's a good place to start with when you're looking at accessing the technologies themselves, specifically for commercialization. Always go to the tech transfer office. And they can really get you moving in the right direction. I'll have some suggestions later on for how to partner a little bit more effectively with federal labs, but in terms of the technologies themselves, generally they are available through the technology transfer website or the FLC business forum or both, and that gives you a really good starting place. Within those areas, there's usually a place where you can contact somebody in the tech transfer office, and they are very good about getting you in contact with the inventor or the appropriate people to really personalize the activity rather than just having to go search around on your own. So that is what I would recommend in terms of actually getting the technologies out of the federal labs.
Great. So Russ and Daniel, and Daniel specifically, Cowboy Technologies is a bit unique and such a good asset to OSU, and somebody could just call you and ask you about the technologies that you have available, but that's not the case for all universities. They might have a technology transfer office, they might have an organization that supports that like Cowboy Technologies, but in general, how would people gain access to university technologies? I know sometimes people just say, well, I'll just call the researcher. I read a paper, or I saw something about a researcher doing work in this area, and then they try to reach out to that researcher. Is that a good way, or are there better ways?
I would actually recommend starting with the tech transfer office also. Every university that's doing research has a tech transfer office, and that's a great way because usually that office has the full spectrum gamut of visibility to invention being done at the university typically. There's still some inventions that maybe haven't been yet disclosed by a faculty member to their respective tech transfer office. Obviously some faculty members at any university have some rapport and domain knowledge in certain areas. You could reach out to those specific domain knowledge holders as you find them at different seminars, trade shows, different publications. But I would actually recommend going through a particular university's tech transfer office. Those get called different names. Some of them a lot of times are housed in what's called a research foundation or something similar to that, but they really will have a better, the widest spectrum of visibility to the technology at that university, the knowledge holders at the university, and then connect you up with those researchers in their particular areas of interest, and facilitate then those conversations between you and the faculty member. A lot of times it is difficult to reach out directly to the faculty member. So I, again, would recommend going through a tech transfer office. Me specifically, again, I only have a kind of a split, narrow view of the overall portfolio of technologies at our university. The ones that kind of popped up on the radar from, a startup opportunity for commercialization, given the right kind of factors of people and market entries, market barriers to entry. So again, Cowboy Technologies has some additional tools when we want to facilitate the tech commercialization for a startup. But again, the tech transfer office, those folks like Russ and his teammates in the Technology Development Center, part of our OSU Research Foundation, they have the wide view of all technologies at the university and technologists doing various areas of research.
So yeah, but so Russ, what would you add to that? I mean, so as Daniel mentioned, you're sort of in the broader scope of the technologies. What would be your suggestions?
Well, and I'm going to take Derek's position here too, because there's hundreds of universities out there, and all of them doing research. Many of them are organized differently, but the Tech Transfer Office is a great place to start, because usually sponsored research programs are operated, if not out of the Tech Transfer Office, at least adjacent to it. And so one of the best, easiest ways to get access to a technology is to fund the research itself. So if you've got a researcher that you identified, or you've got a type of technology and you can identify that, contact the Tech Transfer Office. We can put you in contact with the researcher, work with the researcher and you to get a sponsored research program going, so that the researcher is doing the work that's beneficial to you, and then you would have better access to the technology once it's developed.
And we kind of touched on it, or you touched on it in your responses, but one of the things that I know we're always impressing upon the people that we work with is sometimes you can't always drill down to that specific technology, but if you look at universities and labs that are doing research in those areas, then you can at least identify active labs or active universities that are doing, maybe be doing research in those general areas, and you can contact them and find out if they have something that they could specifically use, or like you said, that they could work with you to put researchers on that path, to say, this is what we're looking for, could you help us out? Those are always, some things that we're trying to impress upon people as well, because sometimes it's hard to drill down to that specific technology. These portfolios are massive. So Derek, you kind of started to talk about this, describing some of the ways you've partnered with industry. There are so many ways that I know I've seen over the years that I've been doing this, that universities and federal labs have partnered with individuals, lots of acronyms, different ways that people partner. So if you could just walk us through maybe a couple of the most common types of partnerships, and what does that look like from start to finish?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways. The first way that a lot of people in small businesses will be interested in is the Small Business Innovation Research Program, SBIR program, because it provides funding. So this is always a good thing when you're in a small company. You want to have at least some money to mitigate the risk that you're undertaking to develop a new technology. So SBIR is a great pathway. SBA.gov as the umbrella website for this is a good place to start, because then you can see which different agencies are offering solicitations at which different times, and kind of get on that cycle and know what you're competing for. So that is a really good opportunity, especially in the UAS technology areas. I think that there's a lot of opportunity in the different federal agencies for that. For my particular area, one piece that we focus on are the cooperative research and development agreements. And this is essentially an unfunded, no direct funding from the government agreement, but it gives you the chance to partner very quickly with a federal lab, get working with those researchers and work on something that's very concrete and specific, where the private sector company is bringing some component of their technology expertise, intellectual property, whatever it may be. The government is bringing their expertise, their mission requirements, and potentially their lab space or their testing facilities, whatever the case may be, just not funding. That's the only difference with a CRADA is there's no government funding associated with it. And you bring these together and you have the opportunity to develop something that works both for the private company. They have the intellectual property and commercialization rights, and the government gets the right to use for the government mission whatever comes out of this collaborative partnership. So it really is something that should work very well for both partners, and it's relatively quick and easy to implement, especially here at NOAA. We can do cooperative research and development agreements very quickly. In order to do that, this is the piece that's always challenging for a company is, yes, they could call me and say, I want to partner with NOAA. The difficulty there for me is that there's thousands of companies that could potentially call and say they want to partner with NOAA. If there's no pull from the researcher side, then it's really hard to, I can't go out and be a salesman for every industry and every company in the United States as much as I would like to be. It's just not feasible. So the key is really trying to establish a relationship with the people at the lab. So if you're going to a trade show, industry events, whatever the case may be, really do try to make those contacts with the people that are there from the laboratories. If you are in a state where there is a federal lab, which is quite a few of them, then and that lab would have some applicable mission areas, you can certainly go and set up a meeting with somebody at the lab. There's no problem with you actually calling the lab directly and just doing a little research and finding out who the right people might be. And even if it's, you could even try something a little bit higher level and see what kind of response you get. But just say you want to learn a little bit more about the lab. They often have tours and things like that where you can at least get some exposure. So those are all suggestions for at least getting started and doing a little bit of the research, but they're really tons of opportunities out there, and it's just a matter of taking a little bit of time to drill down into what's going to work best for your company.
And I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't add, and you can tell me if this is correct or not, but that really all of the different agencies and their labs work very differently or have different rules and regulations when it comes to how they partner, how they license technologies, the process. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. We're talking about it kind of today from NOAA's perspective, but I mean, would you say that that's a fair statement, that it's not a one-size-fits-all for all agencies and all labs?
Most definitely, and that is another area where you could go to the FLC website, federallabs.org. They have a listing of all the different types of collaborative tools. Some agencies have really broad authority. NASA has some really good authority under the Space Act to be able to collaborate with people. Department of Energy has some very good rules that help them to collaborate. Plus, Department of Energy labs are generally run by contractors. They're not run by federal government. It's not a federal government facility in that respect, so it's contractor operated. And that gives them a whole other range of opportunities for doing potential partnerships that we don't have specifically here in NOAA. So there have been some efforts to try to standardize as much as possible the CRADA processes, but it's a big lift. So just come to NOAA. We're quick and easy. It's
Great. So universities are a bit different because, as I think you both mentioned, you all mentioned on both of your perspective sides, universities do sometimes spin out companies. So, and that's, Daniel, I mean, that's your job is to help facilitate some of that and offer some resources for that. So when partnering with a university, and when you're partnering with industry, what are some ways that you typically do that? And if you could just pick on one that, really common way that you partner, and kind of just walk us through what that would look like.
So one of the ways, I would like folks from outside the university to connect is if you have some, domain knowledge, industry knowledge, technology knowledge, of successful commercialization, in whatever technology area or industry area you have some experience in and are looking for the next thing or the new thing. We are diligently working to continue to build out a mentor program here at Oklahoma State University to pair you up with domain experts on the technology development side here at OSU, and would like to continue to build out collaborations between those folks from industry with business knowledge, commercialization knowledge, and those folks that have some new inventive knowledge here at OSU. We feel those pairings are the ones that also lead to successful new enterprises spin out opportunities from Oklahoma State University. So that's one way to connect with the university, is you can contact me if you have interest in collaborating in a certain technology or industry vein, and we can start looking for pairings of technologists here at OSU that might be a great team effort that could result in a commercial enterprise later on. So again, find those opportunities where we start with a mentoring kind of a relationship when the technology is still maybe at early stages at the university, but those directions given or the perspectives given by an industry mentor can really help navigate that research towards a more viable or quicker commercial outcome than if left unattended or left to its own. So that's definitely a good way to connect with the university. Obviously, there's ways of connecting once we do have kind of already identified that we have a viable commercial technology at maybe a later stage of technology development. We worked up what we believe is a good, solid business plan, and we're looking for investment and participation with leadership in different, kind of capacities. It could be a part-time, kind of service to the company for pay and for equity. Be a part of the board of advisors for these companies, be a part of a board of directors for these companies. But again, wanting to connect good industry experts and businessmen with these technologies being spun out of the university, and that's another way to collaborate for these cases where we are working towards spin out startup companies. And by the way, the mentoring, advising aspects, we're not enslaving those kind of opportunities to always being a spin out startup companies. A lot of times it does make sense from a commercially viable standpoint for it to be a license. So if you engage as a mentor and it makes sense to license to an existing company, whether it's your company or some other company, again, we're looking for those opportunities also. So that mentoring aspect is full-fledged, across any kind of commercialization outcome. But we do know that that's a good way of engaging industry with those technologists here at the university.
Russ, did you have anything to add to that?
Nope, that sounds great.
All right.
So Amanda, can I jump in real quick with one other thing I forgot to add?
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the ways, and specifically with UAS technology, that we partner with industry is through our UAS program. I should probably mention that. That would be important. But that's located here in Silver Spring, and so that is kind of a coordinating function for all the UAS activities across NOAA. That's what it's designed to do, is to bring all the different mission components together and find out how the UAS capabilities can serve that mission a little bit better. And we've done a number of cooperative research and development agreements with different UAS manufacturers, the platform manufacturers, to see how they could apply to specific NOAA missions. And it's worked out really well for us, and I hope it's worked out well for the manufacturers as well. They've learned a lot. So.
Well, I'm not sure we'll get to all of our questions, but fortunately the next question is one that I'm glad we're able to have some time for, because I hear it a lot. Oftentimes when we're meeting with individuals through our work, we get this, it's too hard. I don't know how to do it. It takes too long when it comes to talking about licensing a technology from a lab or university, or the cultures are so different, they just don't even know what the process is. So, what would you say are the most difficult parts of partnering with industry, and how would you alleviate some of their fears or concerns? I mean, a lot of it is just fear of the unknown, I think, and stories that they've heard. So how would you, alleviate some of that, and what are some things that would help if they knew in advance? So Daniel and Russ, I'll go to you first, and if you can give us kind of the university side of some things that you've seen and what you might be able to offer as some advice.
The biggest problem we find whenever we're working with industry, primarily going concerns, is having the industrial partner understand that we're constrained by certain laws, rules, and policies. Among those are that any technology developed at OSU by an OSU employee or affiliated individual, that invention belongs to OSU. And oftentimes when we're talking to industry, they're used to owning everything themselves, and we have to work them through the process. It's okay if you want this technology and it has value to you, you can get an exclusive license for it, and that would be virtually the same thing as owning the technology. So that's usually the first issue. The rest of it, for the most part, is working out the terms of the sponsored research agreement. And those, once again, you know, and I'm sure Derek probably has an even more difficult situation there. We have overhead rates that we have to apply. We have to make sure that they understand that they're going to give us $100,000. Not all of that $100,000 is going to go to the research. Some of it's going to go to administration. We're usually cheaper than a national lab, so there's benefit there. Those are the two main issues that we see that sort of crop up relatively regularly that slow things down. Once we identify a partner and a project and a researcher, as long as terms is always a difficult issue, but once we can get started working on the terms, we can usually get an agreement going and a project going with the industrial partner having full access to what comes out of it within weeks.
So Derek, I mean, how does that work with the labs? What are some of your challenges, and that might be different from university challenges? How would you help an entrepreneur or a company who comes to you and really wants to work with you but just doesn't know how?
Well, I would say that it's not the answer that a lot of people want to hear, but when it comes to trying to get an agreement with the federal government, in many, many cases, it is the monumental difficulty and time involved are definitely factors, just because it is the equivalent of a large corporation. I mean, it's different layers and different laws that apply to certain things. Now, with that said, each agency has its own ways of doing things. NOAA in particular is very, very streamlined, because if you talk to me, that cuts through a number of different layers, and I'm not beholden to as many people as you would think. So things can happen a little bit more quickly here than in some other cases. So it does vary depending on the federal agency. But what I would say is that agencies and universities are made up of human beings. So if you can find a human being to talk to, that's really going to be your best bet. And people will do their best to try to make things happen. And I fully realize that a lot of the constraints and the difficulties are on my side, and so I try to minimize those as much as possible, working with companies, especially small businesses, because I know that it's not something that can drag out forever. It's just not viable.
That's true. That's a good point. I mean, when it comes to the partnering with these kinds of partnerships with universities, labs, getting funding, you know, manufacturers, it really comes down to the people at the end of the day. And you know, as long as everybody's willing to work together, then that's a lot of it. It sounds like a lot of it, and you could tell me if I'm wrong, and I'll kind of ask this question to everybody here on the call today. You know, is a lot of it left to the lawyers at the end of the day? You know, once it gets really going, the process gets going, is there a certain level that's just left to the attorneys that they figure out the deal?
Well, so I'll jump in on our side definitely to say that we have, for example, the Cooperative Research and Development Agreement is a template agreement, and as long as you're not too worried about the government trying to come in and steal your entire business, which is really not the point of this whole thing, then it can work out very well. I mean, I haven't seen cases where companies have just suffered from the language that's included in our template agreement. Some of it looks concerning, but really it's just, that's not the case when it comes down to it. So you can hire a lawyer and you can go back and forth on language as much as you really want to, as long as you have the funding to do that. But I don't, it's just, you know, a lot of the stuff is in there because of legislation and it can't be changed. And so it's just, if there's a template agreement, work with it and see what you can do, and that makes things go a lot quicker than anytime you try to make a change in some of these agreements. So yeah, avoid using the lawyers as much as possible. And I try to do that as well. So.
Okay. From the university side, would you say it's pretty similar?
Yeah, we second that pretty much. On our licenses and a lot of the sponsored research, there's business terms that can be negotiated, and then there's boilerplate that is, from our perspective, is part of state law, and that can't be changed very much, if at all. For getting things done quickly, we have our own in-house attorney that manages most of the stuff. Everything we do has to go through our Office of General Counsel, but we've done enough agreements that getting it through them, as long as you don't try to change boilerplate, it's relatively quick. That's why I said we can get a deal done in weeks if we push it hard.
Kind of managing expectations from the beginning. It sounds like that is helpful if they know the parameters, what they can change and what they can't change, or can change going into it. And so, Russ, you kind of mentioned it could happen as quickly as weeks. I mean, I know there's so many different partnerships, and it's really hard to summarize this in, a single kind of answer. But if you had to give a timeline, of someone contacting you who's interested in technology, they identify to, let's just say, a license, how long should somebody expect that to take, just when they're going into this, so they have an idea, and again, managing expectations.
Well, and that's the answer there is it all depends. If it's a going concern that we have a good relationship with, that we've done things with in the past, then that timeline is very short. If it's a third-party startup, we have a little vetting that we have to do. Daniel sometimes assists, sometimes not. But that may take a little longer just to verify that this is a suitable partner for us. If it's an internal group that wants to start a company, then we give them a pretty fast route. We give them access. Normally what we have is somebody affiliated with the university will come in, want to do an SBIR, and we can get them going with an option to the disclosure within a week or two. But for a going concern that's going to have a lot of questions and stuff, 4 to 6 weeks is about as quickly as we can get things done. And if there's a lot of back and forth, it can stretch out into a couple of months. I've had them go as long as 6 months before we were able to come to terms.
Well, that's pretty quick. It's a lot faster than I would have imagined. On the federal side, what are you seeing in terms of a timeline from, in general? I know we're speaking in generalities here with this particular question, but in general.
Yeah, depending on the complexity of it, from my personal perspective, I've done things in weeks, both on the cooperative research and development side and the license side. I'm particularly enabled with respect to licenses. If it's a non-exclusive license, there's no requirement to put that in the Federal Register, which is a thing that will slow things down by at least 2 months. And that's something that we have to do with an exclusive license. So if you're able to do a non-exclusive license, then that's fantastic. We have, again, the template agreement. If you're good with it and we can hammer out the terms, I'm very easy to negotiate with, so that's easy to do too. So that can be done very quickly. If you're dealing with other agencies, you're dealing with something that's complex, if it's a lot of interrelated technologies, or if it's a piece of software that, in the case of a contractor-operated lab, can be copyrighted, or it's a piece of software that's been worked on by coalition of university, federal, and contractor, or some other variables there, things get a lot more complicated fairly quickly, and yeah, you can drag things out for a very long time if you try. Even without trying, you can drag it out for a long time.
Okay, great. We have about 2 minutes left, so we don't have too much time, but I do want to go around really quick, and I want to get an answer from Derek and Russ and Daniel. Just this last question, if you could just give anybody one piece of advice, what would you say, just in kind of 30 seconds or less? So Daniel, I'll start with you.
we are looking for industry engagement. We feel like those are the best opportunities for commercial success. So please reach out. Look at our websites that have kind of the portfolio of technologies are out there, or if you have, if you found through your research that there's some certain know-how areas here at Oklahoma State University, and you'd like to tap into those expertise folks here at the university, we would love to help facilitate those opportunities.
And Russ, how about from your perspective?
Reach out and contact us. We can put you in contact with whoever you need. Modify your expectations. Realize there's certain things we can't do, but as long as we stay within the realm of things we can do, we can get things done relatively quickly.
Derek, same question for you.
Yep. Again, the Technology Transfer Office at the Federal Lab is a good place to start for general information, even not just if you have a specific technology in mind, but just if you want to ask some general questions. That's a good place. People will answer the phone and they will talk to you. Second thing would be, again, as I had said, go to your industry events and seek out the federal labs that are represented there and talk to them there. And that's a good way to go.
Well, we love that advice. We're constantly telling people that going and meeting people face to face and going to events, it's extremely helpful. It's a big component of it. Well, I want to thank you all so much. We had more questions, but this is clearly a topic that we could probably have a whole series on. So maybe this is part one, and we have to continue this in a follow-on webinar. But thank you so much. We appreciate your time, your expertise, and for sharing all of this information, and just for being part of this today. So thank you, everybody.